Welcome to my channel, where the scariest stories come to life. Before we dive into today's chilling tale, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you never miss a story. Now, let's get into the horror. Spring break has always been one of my favorite times of the year. As a child, I used to vacation at the ocean or sometimes even Disney World. Now, as an adult, my wife and I go on holiday together when the children are out of school for spring break. For me, there is no better place than the ocean at night. The way the moonlight glows on the waves and the sound of them crashing always gives me peace of mind. This year, my wife and I saved some extra money and rented a private house on the ocean. It was amazing. Drinking my coffee by the sea every morning and enjoying an alcoholic beverage every night as the moon rose was truly special. One day, I passed out on the beach for a couple of hours, only to awaken from horrible nightmares. They were strange, and I could only remember darkness and a lot of screaming. My wife asked me if I was okay, and I said, yeah, I was just a little shaken up from my dream. My wife went to bed early that night, but I couldn't sleep. It must have been that long nap I'd taken earlier in the day, or maybe the nightmares that woke me up. I wanted to clear my head, so I walked down to the ocean. As I was walking on the lonely beach, I noticed something that appeared to be glowing in the sand. I approached it cautiously, curious but nervous. It was some sort of glowing red ball. It's hard to describe, but I'll do my best. It didn't look like cheap plastic. It was a glowing red sphere of light with no defined edges. I stared intently until it flashed so brightly that it knocked me down on the sand. This flash was almost like a force. The ball flew up into the air and shot itself out toward the ocean. As it reached the horizon, there was a massive blast of light. Within seconds, the sky looked like it was storming, but there was no rain. I saw all sorts of colors in the sky, with a lot of red flashes that I could only describe as resembling heat lightning, though these flashes were lighting up the entire sky. As I watched the intense display of light, I blacked out completely. The next thing I remember is my wife waking me up the following morning, frantic because she hadn't known where I was. I tried to explain what I'd witnessed, but she said I was dreaming and was upset that I had wandered off at night, accusing me of getting drunk and passing out. It's important to note that I don't get drunk, and I would never wander off and not return. Something happened that night that I can't explain. Can someone let me know if they have any idea what I experienced? Could it just be a vivid dream and some sort of sleepwalking, or did I actually witness some kind of alien activity over the ocean? I've been sailing for 4 decades now. Mainly, I sail alone. I like to go out and just enjoy the ocean, as well as do a fair bit of fishing. I have a small boat for such things, nothing fancy or big, but big enough to get around and comfortable enough to sleep in for short stints. In all my years of boating and sailing the Atlantic, I've never had an encounter quite like the one I'm about to share. First off, since I sail alone, I generally don't sleep for very long. Depending on where I am and the preparations I make, I can sometimes get real sleep on the sea, but I've trained myself to sleep no more than 2 hours at a time. I've always been worried I'd drift off course, or worse. I'm familiar enough with the ocean to sleep here and there for up to 8 hours, but I try not to make a habit of it because it's definitely not safe. That's a long story, though, and I'm getting sidetracked. Anyway, for the sake of keeping my identity private, you can just call me Dave. The ocean is a beautiful place and, in my opinion, a world of its own. Sail the seas long enough, and you'll find that when on land, you're itching to go back out again. For me, having done this for most of my life, it's gotten to the point where I consider the ocean my home. Life on land is alright, but there's nothing like the thrill and adventure of the unexpected. The ocean provides that in spades. On this occasion, I had been out at sea for about a week. It was late May in 2012, and I was fishing and relaxing. The days had been good to me, and I was grateful for another opportunity to be out on the ocean, taking some vacation time off work. The day went wonderfully, and as the week was coming to an end, I knew I'd need to head back in a few days to be home for my obligations. Night eventually fell, and the forecast called for high winds, unsettled waters, and some rain. This was nothing I wasn't used to handling. But I decided to try to get through the night and the storm before attempting to sleep. Everything was calm until about 9 p.m., when the sun had completely set and the storm came upon me to the point that I felt like I was in a movie. The waters were rough, and the storm made its presence known. This didn't bother me in the slightest, and I was fully prepared to handle it, until I heard her voice. I lost my wife to brain cancer roughly 7 years prior to this event. She was the love of my life, and we had been together for over 30 years. When she passed, she used to come with me on my lengthy excursions out to the ocean. She was, and always will be, the only woman I'd ever want in my life. The voice I heard was my wife's. I'm positive of it. I was wide awake when it happened, and at the first bolt of lightning, I swore I saw her, like someone standing in the distance. She looked real, and she seemed to be trying to tell me something. I was obviously very perplexed, and I initially thought maybe sleep deprivation was getting to me. I refocused and looked around, only to realize that the wind was picking up immensely. My radio was beginning to cut in and out. My boat was getting slammed by the waves. Keep in mind, as I said earlier, my vessel is sturdy and fully capable of handling rough waters, but it's also smaller. Only then did I realize the storm was much stronger than the initial forecast had suggested. I didn't panic, as sudden weather changes are fairly common, but I tried to radio for help and got nothing. The next thing I knew, I looked up just in time to see a large surge of water hit my boat and knock me off my feet. I tried to steer, but it was too late. Before I knew it, my boat had flipped, and I was thrown into the ocean. I remember trying to keep my head above water, popping in and out, taking short breaths. Then bam, I was hit by another massive wave, dragged under again. I fought with all my might to swim to the surface, gasping for air. I looked up and saw my wife. I could faintly make out 2 words, keep swimming. I know how crazy this sounds, but instinctively, I trusted her voice, and I swam in her direction. I had no way of knowing if this was really her, or how it was even possible, but in my heart, something told me to keep swimming her way. I was hit with another blast of water. Everything felt backward, up was down was up. I truly felt lost, but I pressed on, swimming with every bit of strength I had, gasping for air. I could see her again, wearing the red dress she wore the night we celebrated our 30th anniversary. I just focused on her and tried to stay afloat. Later, I'd wonder if I died there, would I be reunited with her? But in that moment, I was too focused on survival to give up. I kept swimming. Without her guiding image and voice, I'm sure I would have been completely lost. I went under and would lose my way, but I could always follow her voice. I probably would have swam in circles until I died. Thankfully, as I got closer to her, I felt a renewed vigor. Because of her, and to this day, I can't explain how, I'm still alive. I swam in her direction for what felt like an eternity, until she faded away, just a few feet in front of me. She was close enough to reach out, but when I tried, I felt only water. My boat was upright again, bobbing in the ocean. I was able to reclaim my boat soon after the storm died down. I'm not expecting anyone to believe me, but that night, I believe my wife saved me from beyond the grave. I can't explain it. I don't know if it was really her spirit, my mind playing tricks on me in a survival effort, or something else entirely. But to this day, it remains the strangest and most dangerous experience I've had on the ocean. The trip back home was uneventful. I never heard her voice or saw her again, nor encountered any other storm. I still go boating today, but I wouldn't have survived that night without her. I won't pretend to know how or why it happened, but I'm thankful it did. And I hope that, when my time finally does come, she'll be waiting for me in the afterlife. This particular story is possibly the most traumatic week of my life. It sounds dramatic, I know, and I'm already questioning whether I even want to put this out there. My name is Kira. I had a lot of issues with my parents growing up, but they always seemed to trump my feelings of uncertainty with annual trips to the Caribbean. Being from Canada, I always enjoyed the palm trees and vibrant aquamarine of the sea, but mostly, I enjoyed the week-long break from the bullies at my elementary school. I felt lucky. I knew I had an opportunity many kids in my class did not. More than anything, though, I was just happy to have something good in my life. My parents were the type to take me on vacation, give me beers at the age of 10, and tell me about all the crazy stuff they did growing up. However, I was not allowed to have male friends. I was physically abused for minor mistakes I made, and my emotional needs were ignored. It's not relevant to the story, so I won't go into too much more detail, but I was left with the impression that I constantly needed to impress and please my parents if I wanted their love and attention, especially my dad. I tried so hard for him. I tried to impress him even to this day, but I can't help it. My parents took me to the Dominican Republic during March break for this particular vacation. I was 7 years old, and this was my first trip overseas. We stayed at a resort on the waterfront of a popular tourist spot. We spent most of our day there on the beach. I was a fantastic swimmer and loved the water at the time. You practically had to drag me out of it. Nothing could break my spirit. Nothing could scare me, I thought. I always considered my parents to be somewhat responsible. They were so strict, I just thought it was because they were trying to protect me and do what was best. Looking back, though, I get angry at how wrong I was. On the second day of our trip, my father walked me down to the beach. From what I can remember, we ended up at a boat rental area. They had kayaks and other small boats, or what they called kayaks, I guess. But these weren't kayaks. They were more like paddle boards. They were primarily flat, and you sat on them rather than in them. My dad essentially told me to get in the kayak, be safe, and not mess around, before dragging me out in one of these kayaks and pushing me into the water. A young girl around my age approached me, asking if she could join. I was practically conditioned into subservience, so I allowed it. We rode around in the shallow waters until she noticed some big waves on the horizon. She insisted we go out there. I was scared, and I knew it was dangerous and a bad idea, but I'd never had anybody convince me to do something I didn't want to do, really. So, against my better judgment, we rode out there, and slowly but surely, we approached waves taller than the two of us combined. We immediately realized our predicament and attempted to turn around, but it was far too late. A 10-foot wave flipped our tiny boat and flung us into the sea. The waves crashed over me repeatedly. All I could see was the bottom of the ocean for a while. I remember thinking it was beautiful. I couldn't stay, though. I had to do something. The waves were still coming at me, and with my head finally above the water, I couldn't see anything over them, and I felt myself dragged beneath again. Finally, I saw the girl. I hated her, and I didn't want to help her. Then I saw the boat. Both were maybe 20 feet away in opposite directions. I swam harder than ever towards the boat. Tears were streaming down my face. Eventually, I got us back onto the kayak, and our oars were nowhere in sight. We used our arms to paddle forward, and after what felt like an hour, maybe even more, we were back in the calmer waters, where we found one of our missing oars. We used it to get back to shore as quickly as possible. Upon arriving on the beach, we both ran back to our parents, at least, I assume that's where she went, as we never saw each other again. Unfortunately, the story doesn't end there. Even after relaying everything that had happened to my parents, they didn't seem to get the hint that I should be supervised. I wasn't a bad kid, but as a 7-year-old in a foreign country, you'd think they'd be more cautious. A couple of days later, I walked down to the beach by myself, where an older gentleman approached me. He had a strange accent and asked me how old I was. I told him, though I was genuinely creeped out by him. I felt like I had to answer his questions. He was an adult and was therefore in charge. He then asked me if I would hang out with his son, Frederick. I was still nervous, but I reluctantly said yes. I was scared of this man, but at the same time, I wanted another kid to play with, as I was lonely. He took me to Frederick, who, to his credit, was real. I hadn't been tricked or lured, and all my worries instantly melted away. Frederick and his father were visiting from Poland, and Frederick and I bonded, talking about our home countries, interests, and absent parents. I then learned that Frederick was 13. This concerned me, though not as much as it should have probably, being only 7 years old. I knew that he was what was considered at my school a big kid. When you're a kid, a 6-year difference really is a lot. It feels like they have as much control over you as an adult. But we got along great, so I had no reason to think of him as anything other than a friend. We continued to hang out for several days. We would meet up at a specific spot on the beach, and we would talk and play in the sand. We never really went in the water. We would chat and explore the coast. It was a lot of fun. I liked Frederick. On the third day we met up, we played around in the sand. By this point, I noticed his father was never around. I had only ever seen him the first day when he approached me alone. I didn't think much of it. Frederick suggested we go into the water. As someone who loved the ocean, I was more than happy to oblige. I was honestly waiting for this. I loved the sand, but I wanted to swim. We went in the water, talking and laughing, except he kept moving further and further out to sea until I eventually couldn't touch the bottom. He was more than a foot taller than I was, so I assumed he didn't realize I couldn't feel the ground anymore, but then his whole demeanor changed. We were facing each other. I was facing the shore, and he was facing the open ocean. He was blocking my path back to the beach. Though this wasn't a concern at the time until he started acting weird. Nothing leading up to this point would have led me to believe he was a threat. He asked me about my body and if I had ever seen a guy's private parts. Thinking this was a joke, I said no. He then asked me if my parents knew where I was. I, once again, stupidly said no. I was getting worried and told him I wanted to go back to the beach. He ignored me, and then he asked, "Do you want to see it?" Surprisingly, at this point, I actually kind of knew what was going on, and I wasn't being an idiot for once. I tried to swim past him, but he grabbed my arm. Before I could say anything, he put both hands on top of my head and shoved me underwater. I was kicking and screaming, knowing no one could hear me or save me. I felt so helpless. I felt like I was leaving my body. I could see his legs, the empty blue, and my parents lying on lounge chairs half a mile up the beach, sun tanning, drinking cocktails, not a worry in the world. Anger consumed me. I was a good swimmer. I was in martial arts. I knew I could do better. I deserved a chance at life. I wanted my freedom so severely. I kicked, and I kicked Frederick right in the jewels. By pure chance, I somehow made it back to shore by grasping for air and swimming like I was in the Olympics. I ran to my parents, and though they questioned why I was out of breath, all I could say was, "I never want to see Frederick again," and I didn't. During the last couple of days of the trip, my parents looked out for me. They never even questioned my decision to stop seeing this kid who they'd never even met. I put it out of my mind, too. I'm 24 years old now. I recently brought it up to my mother, telling her the whole story. She cried. I get it. I love my parents. Unfortunately, they didn't start paying attention to me until I no longer needed it. Thanks for sticking around till the end. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to give the video a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a terrifying tale. See you in the next one.